James wakes up, head comes off the pillow. He's 8 years old today. Super excited. Today is the day he finally gets to see Jesus. He's been hearing about this guy that's been coming through these towns, has been teaching and drawing crowds from miles and miles away, and today is the day he gets to see him. So he gets up, he can't wait, he gets ready, throws on his robe, starts sprinting towards the town. His parents are coming after him, and he's running ahead, gets to the church, opens the doors, goes inside, and there's Jesus at the front of the stage, and he's teaching. And so James goes and just sits down at Jesus' feet. He looks behind at his dad. His dad's nodding approvingly at the words Jesus is saying, so James nods approvingly as well, wanting to be like his father. And then he hears screams, shouts, yelling, chaos. The doors of the church barge open. The Pharisees walk in, the religious teachers of the law. James had even wanted to be one of these Pharisees when he grew up. And it doesn't take him long to realize that the Pharisees are dragging behind them a woman, literally dragging her on the ground. You hear her screaming, "Stop, please, have mercy on me. I'm sorry. Let me go. Please, I'm sorry." Bring her to Jesus' feet, throw her down. And as they spit on her, they say, "This woman was caught cheating on her husband. The law commands that she must die." They bend down and they pick up a rock, ready to throw it at her. James looks around horrified. He's trying to see who's going to save this woman, who's going to step in and do the right thing. But he realizes that the whole crowd is going to the edges of the temple and is picking up rocks. He looks behind him and is horrified to see that his parents, too, have a rock in their hand. Unsure of what to do, he bends down and picks up a small pebble and looks at Jesus. Jesus doesn't have a rock. He's got a stick. And he takes that stick and he just starts writing in the dirt. Just writing something. And after what feels like an eternity, Jesus stands up, looks right at the Pharisees and says, "If you've never sinned, you can throw the first rock at her." James closes his eyes to just avoid the bloodshed and the gore that's about to happen. But then he hears some distinct sounds, just a poof, poof, poof. As one by one, the rocks start falling to the ground. Opens his eyes and just sees these rocks all falling down. And the people start leaving. One person even spits on the woman as he passes, but no one throws a rock. James' father grabs his hand, starts pulling him away. James breaks away and has to go back and see what Jesus does. So he sprints back into the temple and sees Jesus there saying something to the woman, placing his hand on the woman's shoulder, and the woman turns and leaves. And as she leaves, there's this look of relief and determination on her face as all of a sudden she's carrying herself a lot prouder than she was when she came in. And James thinks to himself, man, that's mercy. And Jesus looks up, sees James, nods his head, and leaves the temple. That story is found in your Bibles. It's in John chapter 8. If you have your Bibles with me, we're going to take a look at this story tonight, starting in verse 2. If you have your phones, you can take those out as well, but it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. That's the New Testament, and so the fourth book of the New Testament, John chapter 8, starting in verse 2. It says, "Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman that had been caught in the act of adultery, and placing her in their midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery.'" Now stop for a second. Have you ever been caught red-handed doing something? Like dead to rights, just you've been completely caught doing something that you know you shouldn't have. You know, when I was little, I think I was about 8. My family's on this road trip, and I'm sitting there, and my sister is doing this really annoying thing. I don't know if any of you have little siblings, but they're really annoying. And that's just their job. It's in their job description. So my sister is doing this really annoying thing where she's just going, poke, poke, and I said I was 8, but it was just like last year. No, I'm just kidding. I was 8. And I just remember getting so irritated that I say, "Hey, Katie, I'm going to hit you." And she's like, "Poke." And so I just go, boom, and just like hit her right in the arm hard. I was a bad person. My mom, who's looking in the rearview mirror the entire time, goes, Zachary Scott. No one else can call me that, just my mommy. Okay, she goes, Zachary Scott, what did you do? Now me, I was pretty smooth, okay? Pretty smooth. Here's what I did. I said, I didn't do anything. Huh? Smart. So she says, I just saw you hit your sister. And now me, smooth, right? Remember? I said, who's that? Good. Now, but the thing is, I knew I'd been caught. I got this sinking pit in my stomach, and I knew I had done something wrong, and I got caught doing it. You guys are probably too young to remember the days before this, but it used to be legal to drive with your cell phone. Like, people would drive and be, like, taking selfies while they're driving, and cops wouldn't care. They'd be on their phones, too, just like, whoa, police officer time. And so it didn't matter. But then this law came out when I think I was 18. And the law came out, it was the Bluetooth law. You had to have one of these, and they didn't have the cars which had the Bluetooth built in. They had these little dorky things you'd put on your ear. And so I didn't want to buy one of those. I thought they looked stupid. And so I'm like, I'm just never going to use my phone. But of course, like most of us, we were addicted to our phones. And so I'm driving, and I hear my phone ring, and I go, I should probably take this call. And this is like a week after this thing has been passed, this law gets passed. So I take my phone, and I just answer it. And literally, as I'm pulling it to my ear, I look over, and there's a police officer going like this. And immediately, sirens, and I pulled over. And he comes to my car, and this is not good for me to tell you. He comes to my car, and he says, do you know what you're doing? And I was smooth, so I said, no, what was I doing? Smart, right? So he says, you were on your phone. And I say, was I? Right? But I knew, I'd been caught, completely dead to rights. Now, before I was a pastor, I was a history teacher for 6 years. Some of you were in my classroom. Middle schoolers are the worst at cheating. They're the worst. What they do, I don't know if you're any better in high school now, but middle schoolers are terrible at it. So what they do is they take their notebooks, right? You guys all remember this. Take your notebooks, and in 8th grade history, we gave open note tests, but you could only use parts of them, and you couldn't use the other parts. So I would catch kids cheating all the time. Remember that time I caught you cheating? I'm just kidding. He wasn't even in my class. And he never came back to youth group again. I'd catch kids cheating all the time. I would look away for half a second so that they would think I'm not looking. And then I would immediately see them. I could always see their pre-cheating face. It was this. And they look down at their notebook, they'd look at me, they'd look around, and then they would immediately just start flipping their notes everywhere. And I'm like, bro, I caught you. And every time they'd be like, caught me what? But they get this look of pale and terror on their face. Every time we get caught doing something we shouldn't, we get this overwhelming ache of guilt and pain. Okay, now imagine the worst thing you've been caught doing. This woman was caught literally cheating on her husband. In the act of cheating on her husband, dragged into the temple courts after being caught cheating on her husband. I don't think I need to paint any more visual picture for you. Dragged into the temple courts, thrown before Jesus, and this overwhelming ache and guilt and pain. And here's what the Pharisees say next. It says, now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? They said this to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Now, these Pharisees didn't like Jesus. And it's because he's going around telling people he was God, and he was insulting what Pharisees thought about grace and forgiveness. He was insulting what they thought about the rules, and Jesus was kind of turning on its head and preaching a message of forgiveness, and the Pharisees wanted to preach a message of rigid rule following just for the sake of rule following. So he had their disagreements with them. So the Pharisees wanted to trick Jesus here. Because in the book of Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament, it does say, if a woman sleeps with another man who's not her husband, then she shall be killed. And if a man sleeps with another woman who's not his wife, then he will be killed. But Jesus is going around preaching this message of forgiveness and grace. So the Pharisees are like, we got him in a catch-22. We're going to bring him in, and we're going to make sure that Jesus is trapped here. So then what does Jesus do? He doesn't defend anything. He doesn't tell them that they're wrong. He just bends down, and he starts writing with his finger in the dirt, just writing something. And the Bible doesn't say what he's writing with his finger on the ground. It says, Jesus bent down, wrote with his finger, and as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw the stone at her. And once more, he bent down and wrote on the ground. And we don't know what he wrote. We don't know whether it was the 10 Commandments. A lot of people think he was writing down the 10 Commandments to show that Jesus, in fact, was the embodiment of the law that was given by Moses, the patriarch that you guys destroyed over there. They thought that Jesus was the embodiment of the law, so they thought he might have been writing the 10 Commandments. Some people might have thought he was just stalling. The Pharisees might have thought that. He could have been, making a tic-tac-toe game to play a high-stakes tic-tac-toe game for the woman's life, which would have been really stressful. We don't know exactly what he was writing, but I think he does write in the ground for a couple reasons. Because one, it allows that woman to really reflect on her sin. Notice that every time we get caught doing something, our first reaction sometimes is defensiveness. And it's us saying, no, I didn't do it. Or we make an excuse for our sin. How often do we excuse the things that we do wrong? Oh, well, I wasn't as bad as someone else. Or, well, someone else was doing it. Or, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or, I don't know. It wasn't me. And we just jump to these defensive statements. And every time we do that, it doesn't allow us to actually reflect on how much the sin is destroying us. And I think Jesus pauses here because he wants this woman to actually reflect on the damage that her sin has done. But I think he also pauses here because he wants the crowd to reflect on their sin. Sometimes we're so quick to accuse people, we forget that we're sinners too. And we start thinking that just because someone looks more guilty externally, it also means that they're more guilty internally. But that's not the case. We're all guilty internally. And everyone in that crowd holding that rock was guilty of sin in that moment. And they've been guilty of sin for most of their life and at different parts of their life. And so they were not innocent in this matter. So in verse 9, it says about the crowd, when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So Jesus stands up and says to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she said, no one, Lord. And Jesus says, neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more. So that's when the crowd leaves. The woman gets to leave, and this is what we find out what Jesus actually says to the woman. And this might make you pause for a second and say, wait, doesn't that make Jesus like a guy who goes back on what he says? Like in the Old Testament, that's God, right? The Old Testament says that sin demands punishment. And sin demands that someone must be killed for this punishment. But when Jesus says, I don't condemn you either, it's not because the woman is completely off the hook for her sin. It's not because the sin is just completely unpaid for. It's because Jesus has placed himself on that hook. And he's taking that condemnation upon himself for that sin. And what I love about that verse right there is in verse 11, the woman says, no one, Lord. The word Lord, it means that someone who's in control, someone who has ownership. So in that moment, she confesses Jesus as Lord. She's just met the guy, and she says, I owe you everything. And because I owe you everything, I'm going to do everything that you ask of me, your Lord. And Jesus says, because you call me Lord, because you have chosen to follow me, neither do I condemn you. Because the deal is, right, that we can pay for our sin on our own. Sin demands punishment. That's what it says in Romans. The wages of sin, what we earn from sin is death. So we can take the punishment ourselves, or Jesus says, I will pay that punishment for you in this beautiful picture of grace and freedom for us. And I wonder if when he was writing on the ground, he was writing the words out of Isaiah 53. And this is prophecy about Jesus that says, it says that he will be crushed for our sin and bruised for our iniquity. And it says that the punishment that brought us peace was upon him. And by his wounds we are healed. And he could have just been writing that and saying, yeah, I've got this covered. You can go and leave this life of sin. So we've started this series. It's called It Is Well. And Adam was here last week and did an amazing message talking about this woman at the well who found Jesus and left her life of sin. And literally, at the end of the story, she leaves her water jug behind, just symbolic moment of, I'm leaving what I came here to do. I'm leaving my old life behind, and I'm going to go tell people about Jesus. And we want to kind of talk about what it means to actually, for it to be well with your soul. And we sang a song last week called It Is Well, and there's that line, it is well with my soul. And some of you guys are like, what is a soul? What does it mean to be well with it? Why are we talking about a water image and also my soul? I don't get it. And so when we say it is well with my soul, we're talking about it being good with that spiritual side of you that makes you unique and valuable to God. Your soul, everyone in this room has a soul. It is created by God to make you unique, valuable, with purpose because you matter to him. And you're deeply loved by him. But sometimes our soul isn't well. And when we're trapped in our sin and completely consumed with things that we shouldn't be doing, it distracts us from Jesus and pulls us away from what he wants. So it's not well with our soul. And so tonight I want to tell you 3 ways that your soul can be well. And we get these from the story. The first is, it is well with your soul when you leave your life of sin. When you choose to leave your life of sin and not look back. It doesn't mean that you're never going to sin again. It just means that it's not going to control you. It won't consume you, and you're following Jesus. You've declared him as Lord. You said, you are Lord of my life. My life is really in your hands, God, and I'm going to follow you. And when we do that, we leave that life of sin. I almost wonder when Jesus was saying this to the woman. We don't hear tone in the Bible. You know, if we listen to the Bible on audiobook, it's just someone else reading or an interpretation. So I don't know what his tone was there, but in that verse 12, when he says, leave your life of sin, Jesus was always the perfect mixture of grace and truth. He would bring grace and mercy, but he would also bring truth when needed. And so I wonder if he's almost pleading with this woman here saying, would you just leave your life of sin? You can go. I don't condemn you, but this sin is killing you. And it's like this anaconda, the snake that you don't even realize it's wrapped around you, and it's just slowly squeezing you, and squeezing you. The sin is going to kill you. Would you just leave it? Leave your life of sin and follow me. The second way it can be well with our soul, it's well with our soul when we learn to walk in freedom. When we learn to walk in freedom with Jesus. It says in Romans that it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And we are no longer slaves to the sin that once controlled us. So how do we walk in freedom? You've probably heard that phrase before. If you've been around the church before, you've probably heard pastors say that before. You might even heard me say that before. And you go, it doesn't matter how often I try. I can't shake this one sin. It doesn't matter how often I try to do the right thing, or how many accountability partners I have, or how many times I come to youth group, or how many times I pray, crying on my knees for God to deliver me from this one sin and this one temptation. It doesn't matter how many times I do it. I can't shake it. And for some of you in this room, you feel that tonight. And I'm telling you that there is a way to walk in freedom, but what it is we keep our eyes on Jesus. And we stop looking around at our past. We stop looking behind us at the life of sin we've left. We stop looking around at the people accusing us and saying things about us. We stop looking around at friends who aren't really our friends that want to bring us down. And we start heading towards a path that pursues Jesus. There's this beautiful book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you that you read it at some point. Most of you in the room maybe have read it or at least heard of it. It's called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this is a children's book. It's written for children, but it's this beautiful story of the gospel. And in this children's book, there's these 4 kids, and one of them, his name is Edmund. And the kids go through this wardrobe. It's like a magical thing. It takes them to this land called Narnia, and there's talking animals, and one of the animals, the lion, Aslan, represents Jesus in the story. And the witch, The white witch kind of represents this devil figure or just the world and the way the world kind of pulls at us and makes us feel guilty over our brokenness. And so Edmund doesn't want to go with the lion. He's like, nah, I'm tuning out God. I'm going to go with that witch. She's got candy. And so he like straight up goes with the witch for a while because she has candy. That's really in the book. So don't take candy from strangers. Edmund didn't learn that. So he goes with this witch, and then he realizes how evil this lady is. But by then, he feels trapped. And he tries to break away, and he comes crawling back into Aslan's camp. And Aslan looks at him, and he says, let's go for a walk. And Edmund kind of stands up like, oh, dude, that lion's going to eat me. He's going to kill me. And he goes walking with Aslan. And we don't hear their conversation. But when Edmund comes back, he's not crushed, slumped down, shoulders down. He's walking in freedom. You see, he's kind of got his chest puffed out. He has confidence. He knows who he is. He knows where his identity is found, that he's a son of the king. And so when Edmund comes back, the white witch shows up. And here's what she says. She says, you have a traitor there, Aslan, said the witch. Of course, everyone present knew she meant Edmund. But Edmund had got past thinking about himself after all he'd been through and after all the talk he'd had that morning. He just went on looking at Aslan, and it didn't seem to matter what the witch said anymore. For us, some of us just need to focus on Jesus. We need to actually look to Jesus and stop worrying about what everyone else is saying about us and the gossip that's happening around us and the guilt that we feel. We need to look to Jesus and start learning how to walk in freedom. And the final way, that can be well with your soul. Because some of you guys are sitting in here, and you're saying, well, yeah, but that woman, yeah, she was messed up. You know, like, yeah, she was committing adultery. I mean, I haven't done anything like that. No, but we're sinners. And for a lot of us, we're so quick to judge people who are different than us. We're so quick to condemn people who are more broken than us. And we're kind of sitting there, and you're not literally doing this, but our hearts are kind of closed off like this. And I wonder if some of us in the room are just like those people that are so willing to pick up those rocks and throw them. And we're so willing to condemn people who are broken when they come in these doors. And so for us tonight, high schoolers, it's well with us and it's well with our soul when we learn not to throw rocks. We took a group of juniors and seniors on a trip called Base Camp. And it was an awesome, awesome time. And afterwards, I asked some of these juniors and seniors and then a few others who came to one of our planning meetings, and I said, hey, guys, could you just tell me what the culture is like at the high school right now? Can you tell me what the culture is like, specifically what people think about ABC Youth Group? And you've probably heard these words about ABC Youth Group before. Some of you may not even come for a long time because you thought this about ABC Youth Group. But every single junior and senior affirm that what's said around the high school about ABC Youth Group is that we're judgmental and we're hypocrites. That the students at ABC are hypocrites. They say, don't do this, but then they turn around and they do it. And they're just as messed up as me. And why would I want to be at a church like that with just a bunch of hypocrites? That the second I walk in the door because of my brokenness, or the second I walk in the door because I haven't been at youth group in a while, they're going to just make fun of me or challenge me or glare at me, or I'm not going to fit in, or I'm not going to feel comfortable. And so they think that everyone in this room is judgmental. They think that we're hypocrites. And whether that's true or not, I think sometimes, sadly, in a lot of ways in our own hearts, that might be true. But whether that's true or not, that's not the perception that we want as a youth group. That's not the perception that I want for you. I know that's not the perception you want. And it's definitely not the perception that Jesus wants and what he is seen as. And so it's our job as the church, as the bride of Christ, to change that culture. How amazing would it be if the people at the high school, instead of saying, man, every kid at ABC, they're just hypocrites. What if they said, man, you know what? Every kid at ABC, they may not be perfect, but I know that they care about me. And I may not always agree with what they believe, but I know that they really believe it. And I know that if I ever choose to walk in those doors, I won't be judged. I won't be condemned. And I know that I'll be loved. And I know that if I go away for a while, or I kind of drift away from God and I come back, then I'm going to be welcomed with open arms. If we were a church that people at the high school would say that about us, or at Templeton High School would say that about us, or at Paso High School would say that about us, imagine the change that would happen in this community. Imagine the change that would happen at this high school. Guys, I think it's already started. I'm seeing new student after new student after new student the last few weeks walk through these doors because they're recognizing that this is authentic and that maybe there's something about the students here that, yeah, they may not be perfect, but they're going to be full of grace and full of truth. I'm going to invite the band back up here, and they're just going to play one more song for us tonight. And as they sing this song, I want you to reflect on a couple truths here. It's a song that a lot of us may have heard, and it's called How He Loves. And if you want to sing along, awesome. If you just want to sit and reflect on God's character for you, that's great too. But there's this line in the song that I absolutely love for this story tonight. It says, I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that He loves us. And every time I hear that line, I get emotional because I think of my own past and my own brokenness and how I can so often just spin on the regrets of my life if I choose to. And I think, man, if maybe I just would have done things differently, I'd be better. Or if I just would have done things differently, things would have turned out better in this relationship or this broken family member or whatever else it is, and I will spin on these doubts and guilts and frustrations. And what Jesus says is, He just says, go and would you leave your life of sin? Don't spin on it. You don't have time to regret it. You're going to learn to walk in freedom.